Hi everyone, this is Mr. Xiao. We're going to be talking about week 23 and we're going to be looking at assignment number 1, which is actually going to be a quiz, an assessment, and it's going to be a DBQ or a document-based question that you're going to have this week to work on. And just make sure you get it in on time, but I want to go over this with you so you know exactly how to write and how to get started on this assignment. All right, so let's go ahead and go to our Google Classroom. And in Google Classroom, go to week 23, and that's from February 8th to February 12th. And we are going to be looking at assignment number 1, which is a quiz, talk about the causes of World War One. Yes, we talked about the causes of World War One, and now we're going to be giving you a little bit of an assessment to test you if you understand what actually caused it, okay? And so you can read all these directions, and I'll come get back to that in a little bit, but let's go ahead and go to week 23's assignment right here, which is the DBQ. And again, the document-based question refers you to kind of look at these documents before you write, okay? And so the directions are to kind of follow this point of view and also look at like what the author is saying or speaking before you comment on the questions below, okay? And so now you're going to be looking at a couple things for each document. There's three documents. I'm going to do the first document with you. And the document is all asking the same question. How is this an example of a specific cause of World War One? So you're going to answer the guiding questions first, and there's only 2 guiding questions per document. And these guiding questions are only just to help you think about sourcing, maybe close reading, collaboration, and just identifying also where this document came from. Okay, so let's look at that closely. And then you're going to need to formulate a main idea or reason why you believe this document is an example of maybe nationalism, okay, a cause of World War One, or imperialism, also a cause of World War One, and maybe even, I guess, militarism, which is, again, part of the mania that we talked about last week, which are causes of World War One. You're going to need to give supportive sentences after you formulate an idea, but you want also actually pick 2 specific evidence from the document. So you have to refer back to the document and tell me you see something in there that is evidence for a cause or the reason why it relates to this cause specifically, okay? And you need to write a well-organized paragraphs and make sure that you support and clearly identify your reasoning, okay? So we'll do that the first example together. And before we get started, we're going to look at the guiding questions. And the guiding questions are only 1 point each. They're not worth a whole lot, but it is actually something to kind of help you think a little bit more about the document. So is this a primary or secondary source? So a primary source being that is it a document that actually came from the time period in 1914 to about 1918, which is the period during the war? Or is it something that was written after? Okay, and so let's look at this closely. This chart provides information on the increasing amounts of money spent on armaments, which is weapons and guns, from 1870 to 1914. And the source is from something called From Europe, 1815 to 1914. That's the title. And it's by Gordon A. Craig, who wrote it in 1966. So knowing that it was written in 1966, I'm going to big highlight that. Do we know if it's a primary or secondary source? Did it come from the time of the war? No, it didn't actually. So we could put down this is a secondary source since the information was published many years after the war. Okay, so it's a secondary source. It's from another text. It's from research that Mr. Craig did, and then he was able to find this information and publish it. Okay, so that is actually something way back when. All right, so the next question is asking you, remember back to the size of the armies of the countries above. Is there a connection between the size of the armies and how much was spent? Okay, and so let's think about like Russia, France, and Germany. Russia had close to about they had probably the largest army, okay, close to like maybe 12 million or more. And then Germany had like about 7, and France had 4 million. And so all these countries were the biggest ones, and Great Britain only had about maybe 3 or 4 million people. Austria-Hungary also had like a smaller amount, and Italy had a smaller amount. But let's look at how much they spent, okay? So, uh, looking at the army sizes, okay, Russia had the biggest fighting force, but they only spent 340, like $3.44 per capita, meaning like per unit for war for military weapons. Okay, whereas Great Britain, France, and Germany had the largest spending. Okay, and even at one point, okay, but I guess this was a cost for another war the British were fighting. They were spending $12 per unit, which is a lot during that time. And so $8, 7, and 8, France, Germany, and Great Britain were the biggest spenders. So is there really a connection? Because France and Great Britain did not actually have the largest armies. Germany had the second largest armies, and yet they were spending way more. What do we do know about the war? That Germany was the one that kept it going. They kept on fighting, even though Austria-Hungary and a lot of their allies kind of stopped fighting. They kept on. So because they had one of the larger armies and also the most spending, it goes to show you that it really did help. But Russia dropped out also early, like later in the war. So we could say there is no connection between the size of the army and how much they spent. Since, okay, you have to give a reason. Germany uh, spent almost as much as Great Britain. Well, and had only the second largest army. GB or Great Britain spent the most and had one of the smaller armies. Okay. Like, so it's really kind of interesting how, like, Great Britain spending the most, it had one of the smaller armies. Germany spending the least, actually spending one of the most, also had one of the greatest armies. But I guess that actually was one of the strengths of Germany. They had the army, and they had the spending to kind of back it up. Okay. All right, so that's actually kind of how you answer the primary questions. They're just kind of like regular questions. What is difficult is doing the paragraphs. So let's do the paragraphs together. So there's a sentence frame, and as we look at it, this is actually what we're trying to answer. How did an increase in military spending contribute to World War One? And so we're asking, how does this show? Okay, uh, how does this show as this one of the major causes of World War One? And that's actually militarism. So we could actually talk about militarism in this paragraph. And so you might want to talk about this increase in spending caused World War One because, okay, and why did it cause World War One? Because it was something called an arms race, okay. And so Great Britain and Germany were literally the ones competing, the the biggest ones competing, whereas France probably was also very involved, okay, because they actually had a very large army, but they didn't spend as much as Great Britain when it comes to designing new military weapons, okay. So let's start with the sentence frame, and we're just going to fill that out, okay. So the increase in spending caused by World War One, and then I'm just going to highlight all of this, okay. Okay. The increase in spending in World War One is because the increase in spending caused World War One because several of the larger uh, countries was in was in a arms race in which they were developing weapons to continue fight with each other. Okay? This was known as militarism. And you don't have to write as much as I have. I'm just trying to make it very clear for you. And so that my thesis is also very clear. The increase in spending caused World War I because several of the larger countries were in an arms race in which they were developing weapons to continue to fight with each other um, and to compete militarily. Militarily. Okay? And this is pretty much known as militarism. Okay? All right. First increases in arms were in Germany and Great Britain, who spent the most. And why this is important, okay? And so we have to talk about that. This evidence illustrates how the war began with these countries who were in a battle of the strongest military. Since when Great Britain developed um, metal warships, the Germans invented U-boats to defeat them. Okay. Okay. In addition, and then maybe you want to talk about the countries that have spent the least. In addition, countries that spent the least amount of time in the war. War. This evidence proves that Russia, who only spent spent half as much as Germany on armaments. Arms did not or were not defeat them and lost several big battles in the beginning of the war. And that's also the reason why it lasted for 4 years. Okay. So basically, the bigger the spending, the longer they were in the war, and the harder they fought. And because I think Great Britain spent the most, they were the ones that won. Okay, in the end. All right, so these are just kind of ways you want to develop and give very specific reasons. Okay, so time in the war. This evidence proves that Russia would only spend half as much as Germany on arms, was not able to defeat them. Okay, because in the beginning they were not able to fight really against the Germans very well, even though Germany was caught in between France, Great Britain, okay, on one side, and Russia on the other side. And Germany still fought for 4 years without defeat. So that goes to show you like how much the spending really made a difference. A lot of spending, little spending. Austria-Hungary, Italy, we don't really hear very much about them in the war. And Russia, definitely don't hear about them because they were out very early. Okay. All right, folks. Hopefully, this is something that helps you understand how to kind of write this. And you want to really take advantage of the sentence frames, really kind of look at how we can connect more ideas, use your books, even try to look up a few things or research a few things to kind of help you know a little bit more about the war as you kind of explain each sentence and each piece of evidence. Okay. All right. Hopefully that is our time. And if you have more questions, we'll do this again in class as well. All right. Thank you for your time, guys. Goodbye.